So this Shabbat, we get to pronounce a new month, as we often do the Shabbat before a new month begins, and sometimes it happens over the Shabbat or over the weekend itself. The Shabbat before a new month, so that would be this Shabbat as well, is called Shabbat Mivarchim, right? You think that there are these special Shabbatot before Passover and leading up to the high holidays, and when else are there special? Oh, there's a special Shabbat when we read about crossing that sea. It's called Shabbat Shirah. It's February 7th and 8th this year. I happen to know that because it's our son Ben Ishai's bar mitzvah, so he's got that in his Torah portion, making the date and the story very close to our hearts. But every Shabbat before a new month, it's called Shabbat Mivarchim because there's a special set of blessings, a special set of things that we just add to the Torah service. And at the end of that special blessing, which we'll do tomorrow at the Torah service, we say something very interesting, which is Chaverim Kol Yisrael. You know, we say that all of that means that, well, how would you translate that? Literally all of Israel are friends, or all of Israel are part of one group. Or how else would you translate that, anybody? Family, we're all part of one family. So it's very interesting. We say, the beginning of that prayer says, and we hope that we'll have a month of goodness, and we'll do part of it in a moment in the Amidah, which is why I wanted to talk about it now. We want everybody should have parnasah, everybody should be able to make a living. We wish that everyone have health. We wish, of course, that we have peace. We wish that the month ahead renews for us, right? Goodness and light, especially the month ahead, which is Kislev, which is the month of Chanukah, which is why we'll be focusing on light in darkness. But why add to that? Chaverim Kol Yisrael, all of Israel are friends, are part of one group. Why add that? I think if there's something that we need to repeat, especially about how we should behave toward one another, it's because we are so likely to forget it. The reminder is that actually we do have this responsibility, one for each other, and that we're all part of something that's called Klal Yisrael, which is all of Israel is connected somehow. Klal is the totality of Israel has to remain one, regardless of how much we may disagree with each other. And I find that to be so powerful, especially in the last 14 months or so, how much we've crossed over different kinds of lines between denominations, between modes of observance, between being in the diaspora and being in Israel, being here, being in Amsterdam, being here, and being in the UAE, the Chabad rabbi. Everybody knows that the Chabad rabbi in Dubai was murdered. What I find interesting about that is a head of the UAE government came to Israel yesterday or today for the funeral. There's a connection between all of Israel for joy and for sadness. And a very bizarre thing happened this week, which is, speaking of Klal Yisrael, which is a colleague and a friend who's the head of ARTSA, which is the American Reform Zionist Association, the Zionist part of the Reform movement. If you're ever in doubt, yes, we have a Zionist arm of the Reform movement. David Karp reminds us, if we ever forget, it helped to establish the two Reform kibbutzim and be part of establishing also Hanaton, which is not a moshav, but it's I don't know, Ofer, what would you call Hanaton? It's like a settlement, it's a community of Reform and conservative Jews. But my friend, Rabbi Josh Weinberg, who I hope you'll meet soon, who's the head of that arm of the Reform movement, sent me a message a couple days ago asking me if I would explain Reform Judaism to a group of settlers. And I thought, Josh, very funny. I thought it was a joke. I honestly did. I've known him since he was about 4 years old, and I was about 10 years old. Really? There's a group of settlers, meaning in Judea and Samaria, or in the Shtachim, in the territories in the West Bank, really part of very, very, what's the nicest way I can put this? Someone's going to help me. Some of us were in a settlement in, where were we? Shiloh? Shiloh, right? But settlers who were very adamant, very clear about their rights to land, even land that doesn't belong to them, very adamant about even building illegal outposts, illegal by Israel's current government standards, but those are, of course, changing. And one of the things that's become very clear in Israeli society is that the capacity to even talk to each other has become even more difficult. And of course, even though people are standing together mourning and sharing losses on one hand, on the other hand, there's part of the Israeli community that's not risking their lives through these last 14 months. So there's also a split. Wait, we're supposed to give our last drop of blood, and your sons aren't even going to serve in a kitchen in an army base? So there's a real tension. So I asked Josh, well, what do you mean? And he said there's an organization that really is working to be able to encourage the leaders of some of the settlement communities to learn about diaspora Jewry in particular, because it has become very clear, also with the tensions in the Israeli government now and in Israeli society, that one of the things that part of the settler community doesn't seem concerned about is about the Jews all over the world and understanding who they are. It's not just that we're part of Klal Yisrael, we're part of the whole of the Jewish people, but actually maybe we should learn something about each other. So when some of us were in Israel, April, I guess a year and a half ago now, I'm going to say tried, some of you more successfully than some of us, to really understand what it means to have that kind of a commitment to what they understand to be the land of Israel and different biblical sites, even at the cost of displacing others and having the army risk the lives of its soldiers to protect them. And I have to say I was quite torn about whether or not I would be willing to do this. You know, Josh, aren't there other Hebrew speakers you could ask to do this? And he said, no, I really think it should be you. You know the place, you live there, you'll be able to understand where they're coming from. And I have to say, as I stand before you on this Shabbat, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether or not it's a good expenditure of my time, which is your resource as a congregation. I'm not sure whether there's really anything that I could say. But when I thought about it a little bit more, I thought about this prayer that we say on the Shabbat before a new month, which is Chaverim Kol Yisrael. We don't have to like each other. We don't have to agree with each other. But if there is, right, a reaching out, or even in this case, an opening of a Zoom channel to try to understand each other a little bit more, then this prayer that we say every month should remind us to try to do so. And perhaps if the ceasefire holds, we'll have a little bit more of an openness in minds and hearts, and I will get back to you next Shabbat about whether or not I felt that it was an expression of this prayer of Chaverim Kol Yisrael in doing so. There's one more thing about Rosh Chodesh that I wanted to stress this evening, especially because we're about to have one of our Rosh Chodesh celebrations this coming Wednesday, right, together. And if you are identified as female and you haven't yet signed up, it's not too late to do so. And some may have asked, why is Rosh Chodesh a regular, every month, but an event that women in particular have celebrated together? Does anybody know? It's just one of those things. The moon. Thank you, Eleanor. The moon, right? Rosh Chodesh celebrates a new month, and it's when the moon is new, right? It's a tiny, tiny sliver of a moon on the Rosh Chodesh. And it is said that women, right, understand the cycle of a moon because our menstrual cycles, right, are following that pattern. So we have a clear identification with that rhythm of the moon and of nature. But in fact, in a midrash of Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, they say that it is really for a very specific reason. You ready? When the Israelites were in the wilderness waiting for Moses to come down from Mount Sinai, they grew fearful at his long absence. And as you know, what did they do? They lost faith in God, according to this midrash. And they decided, led by Aaron, who I think was just trying to keep them busy, that's my interpretation, invited them to construct an idol, the golden calf, that they could worship instead. You know the story, right? But the Israelite men, where were they going to get the gold to build this golden calf, right? They'd just been schlepping themselves through the desert. Some of you may remember that. Where might they have gotten the gold from? Right, we've studied this in our Torah study, that on their way out of Egypt, they said to their neighbors, hang on a second, do you have any gold we can take with us? And I think the text stresses that they borrowed it, which I think is hysterical. Like we're still, like we were going to go back someday. Or it was reparations. Or we just took what we had. It depends on how you want to read the story. Anyway, the Israelite men went through the camp ordering the women to give up their necklaces. Can you imagine? Their bracelets and their earrings so that there would be more gold to build the golden calf. And what do you think the women did? Anybody? What do you think the women did? Right? Remember that the women, if it weren't for the women being so chutzpahdik, we never would have survived slavery. We'll come back to that another time. But the Jewish women, according to this midrash, they refused. They remained loyal to God, or loyal to their jewelry, I'm not sure, and refused to surrender their jewelry. In honor of the Israelite women's righteousness and loyalty to God, God proclaimed Rosh Chodesh as a holiday especially for women. In other words, it's not because of a natural cyclical sense of rhythm, but it's because of a particular faith where they knew that even though, now take the whole gender thing out of it for a second, they knew that even if everyone around them was saying, this is what we should do, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to spend our resources, they knew, and perhaps we should remember it as well, that we have to know what our truths are. And even if an entire society, right, it must have felt that way to them, an entire society, even people who have more power than they did, which is certainly the men and the heads of the tribes, even if people have more power than us, it's up to us to maintain our faith in what we believe. It's up to us to not allow for resources to be spent in ways that we don't think are right or are ethical or are true. And that's what I think Rosh Chodesh every month should come to remind us as we see that sliver of that new moon. It's an opportunity to renew ourselves and become more focused on what our values are and how we want to spend our resources, be they gold, be they money, be they our time, our attention. We can decide how to focus all of our resources and our lives anew every month. Chodesh Tov, may it be a good month.